All right, welcome back to the pod. Today we have Gray MacKenzie. He is the founder and CEO of Zenpilot, and he is a true operations nerd in his own words, with a passion for helping agencies build healthy, productive, and profitable products. Gray has built Zenpilot into ClickUp's largest and highest rated solutions partner, which is very impressive, and has spent the past decade helping over 2,700 agencies streamline their operations. He and his wife are raising 4 wonderful children in Western Pennsylvania and are always looking for new travel and adventure recommendations. So if you reach out to Gray, hit him up with your recommendation for travel. He is on a mission to help agency owners and their teams turn chaos into clarity so that they can enjoy healthier, more productive, and more profitable teams. Gray, welcome to the pod.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I like the intention and the focus of profitable is good, but if you're suffering, if your health isn't well, if your mental health isn't there, if you're missing out on life, are you really profitable?
Yeah. Both those things definitely, it's all tied together because it's extremely hard to build a healthy team or culture that's not profitable as well. And it's not highly profitable enough to be sustainable and have enough resiliency to get through. We went through post-COVID. I'm sure you've seen this, but we went through the best 18 consecutive months in the agency ecosystem in the last 15 years. And then we've gone through some of the hardest 18 months or 2 years here over the last, certainly tail end of 2022.
It was 23 this summer. That's where it was the hardest.
Weathering those ups and downs, but all that goes together. Productive, profitable, and healthy for sure.
No, then that's... no pun intended. I think once you find closer to the truth of what works in any field or any endeavor, that's why my first book was called Productive Profits. It's how do you do this effectively? I want to double click on that. So you just give you real case study. One of my clients right now, they're really healthy, really well, doing a good amount, want to hit 8 figures. They have values and the culture, but it's not really clearly defined, or they don't really leverage it to make decisions, which is really what the whole goal of culture is, a framework to making decisions. And we had a really awesome guest, Hal. I'll make an intro to you if you want. And he talked about that when he focuses on the values that he develops for his agency, he focuses primarily, this is just a framework to make decisions. It's not this hoorah, feel good thing you slap on the wall. How do you leverage, and with intentionality, because for our listeners out there, if you don't know, COVID was a very difficult time for life in everyone. In the online space for work, everyone was online. So a lot of agencies popped, a lot of opportunities for digital marketing. Everyone was online. Everyone had the quote unquote helicopter money. And it was very healthy for a lot of agencies, even some of my clients and some of my friends as well. But then I think you mentioned the summer of 23. That was the hardest, where the lowest dip and the people were bouncing back.
Yep.
How did you, or what were some of the ways that you intentionally crafted the mindset of your team in alignment with not just your mission, but how you show up every day?
And you're talking not COVID specifically, right? Or not
COVID specifically, but just because this was an endurance thing. You guys had to be healthy for the big sprints, but then also now where it's super hot and it's dry and you're running out of water and you're tired. How did you prepare for that?
Yeah. I'd say, and I think this is true for most teams. So if anyone's listening, nobody or very few founders are that intentional about culture at the beginning.
So true.
I think that's just happens at the beginning. I think you're probably more intentional the second time, but priority number one is just survival. How do we pay the bills for this month and get to next month? So it's not that culture doesn't matter there. It's that culture is not the main focus at the very beginning. And that's our story too, is starting our agency, Guava Box, back in 2011. This business will probably fail in a year, but we'll learn a ton of really cool lessons and have good experiences. So let's just go for it. And so it's just the survival game at the very beginning.
Yeah.
This next version of Zenpilot that we're building today has been much more intentional. And so that's where just getting some reps under your belt. And this is the third iteration of, we had the agency Guava Box, then we built a project management software called Do Inbound. We pivoted that software into the training and consulting business that Zenpilot is today. And so this has been the most intentional one. There's a strong point of view about the type of business that we're going to build, the type of profitability and health and productivity that we're going to have on the team. And then defining those, if anyone goes to the Wayback Machine and looks at the Do Inbound site from probably 2016, there's a values page on there. And that was the first time that we were public about our values. They've been redefined since then. And so then when we changed over to Zenpilot and we're ready to build a team again, one of the earliest things we did was set out, hey, these are the 5 core values that we have, and try to build those as pillars of the culture. Those are like a screen for who, ultimately the culture is like driven by the people who are here. The culture is what we tolerate and what we celebrate. And that all starts with who we tolerate in the organization and who we celebrate in the organization. So those kind of have to be a filter for who gets in and then who sticks at Zenpilot and who doesn't. And so I think finding, and for any value to mean anything, there's got to be an inverse of that value that isn't an obvious, hey, I'd hate to have that person on my team. Obviously, we all want people who are honest. That's not, no one's like, yeah, I'm building around dishonest.
It's not really valuable.
So those like systems thinkers being a core value, they're great, awesome people. They're a little bit more chaotic, but they're incredible creatives and like really incredible at blazing trails and solving problems for the first time. And those people have a ton of value. But that's not the value that we're going to bring to our clients, is to have a team full of those people and personalities. So I think it's just been being intentional about who comes, like setting what matters to us most. And then those are the filter for who gets in the door and who doesn't get in the door.
It makes a lot of sense. Walk me through, and this is, obviously there's a level of maturity that you're having when you're doing this. You said third time around, second time around with multiple reps, obviously different iterations, different pivots. So I think there is that, even just seeing my personal growth in leadership from 2016 to 17, 18, 19, all these different experiences. And when you talk to different founders, you can see where they're at in the leadership, like pendulum or story arc. And it never really ends. There's no really part where you're like, oh, I'm there. So putting that out there. But you viewed this new iteration of the business differently, which allowed you to behave in not just different behaviors, but you see what it is and you also see what it could be because of your experience. And I want to dive into the things of what because right now, if listeners see their business as it is, they have an idea of the vision of the future. And this isn't vision casting. This is more like you behave to the level of expectation that you have. People around you behave to the level of expectation that you have, or your perception of them. If you believe someone is unhealthy or isn't intelligent, if you treat them that way, they will behave towards that level. That's just like a psychological piece. So I'm taking that abstract idea, bring it here practically in business. There is something you're seeing in the business. To walk me through those micro leaps of faith, because as you move forward from where it is in the pivots, for every single pivot, there is that, like I always imagine in the Indiana Jones movie, where you have to cross the bridge and the bridge is invisible, but you can't see. You got to take one step at a time. So you are taking those steps. What are some of the things that are going through your mind as you're taking those steps, knowing that you have to build this thing? You still don't see the next step, but you see enough to take one small pivot forward.
Piece at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple like core beliefs about the type of business that we want to build. Not that you can't build a business in a different way, but like what intentionally do I want to build here in this iteration of company and for this stage? And so building around a leveraged expertise business model has been a core belief, which is I want to get paid for what I know, not just what we can do. And so to do that, you need to be smart at something. You've got to be an expert at something. And like, how do we become an expert at something? You see that problem over and over. You see what happens when you try different approaches to solve that problem. You see what happens a year down the road and 2 years down the road and everything else. And the most common recurring challenge is, I don't know how sustainable this solution is. It's like the client comes to us, here's my problem. We're trying to do resource management. And we've taken a bunch of different stabs at what resource management looks like. We've worked with a bunch of different teams. I was doing a presentation earlier today. I was talking about the 7 core project management lessons that I've learned from the 40-something 8 or 9 figure agencies that I've worked with behind the scenes, the team's worked with more, but just that I've seen personally. And what are the commonalities operationally? And so we've studied folks, we've seen different approaches to it, we've tried it. The unknown is, okay, this is what we think is the best thing. This is what we're going to coach you on and we're going to do now. We're not really going to know how does that scale in an organization. And so your two reactions to that are either go in with a lot less confidence in what you're presenting and be like, man, I don't really know. I think this is probably the best bet, but who knows what'll happen. So do you want to do this or do you want, like, here's the other options that we're kicking around and why don't you make the call? At which point you're not the expert. Or to say, hey, this is the very best advice that I have for you based on what I know right now. And as I learn more, like we're paying attention to all this, we care about the long-term success for you and for us. And as I learn more, we'll help translate that to you as well. So I would say that's the most common blind spot. But the core principle of, hey, I want to build a business around expertise, and we're going to build expertise a lot faster if we narrow down the different variants of what we're looking at. So by looking at agencies running on ClickUp primarily, that is a very narrow focus on a very small segment of the market. And so we get to see that more than anybody else in the world. And just being able to pattern match, which is like the fundamental skill set for intelligence or expertise, that like the trust in those blind spots and in those, man, I don't know if this is 100% the right way to do it or not, is we have to push through this to get to the answer and to get to the outcome that we want, which is we know the best way. So I'd say that's the most common piece is, and this is one of the humble and hungry is one of our core values. And so I want our team to always be eyes wide open that we do not have the perfect solution yet, for sure, in any of these areas. Hopefully we've got the best solution that's out there today. But even that, I'm sure, is not always the case. And so we've got to be humble enough to recognize that and hungry enough to want what is right.
Go after it.
And so let's go pursue that.
No, I resonate a lot with that. You opened up like a plethora of different mind nodes to dive into that. I really love the leverage expertise. Can you help us define the antithesis of a leverage expertise? What is the opposite of that so that we can better understand what is we're talking about?
Oh yeah, no one's ever asked me that question. That's great. I'd say that the typical agency model is that, like the antithesis is the digital yes man, and digital is even not the word, like it's the yes man or yes woman agency. It's the, you ask me to do whatever and I'll go do it. Like, will you coach me? Yeah. Will you coach me on running an agency? Yes. I've got a friend who runs a mechanic shop. Can you coach him? Sure. Why not? Can you coach me on sales and how to package up and price better? Yes. Can you also help me on the HR side? Sure. It's the yes to everything. Yeah. It's not that you can't build expertise there. And there's some principles that are more universal, but you certainly can't be like, there's a reason that general surgeons make way less than specialists in any area. Yeah. Is because when it counts the most, you need the specialist.
Yeah, you got to go all in if you're deciding in the fence. And I'll give a counter idea of that. Not to say that this is wrong or right, because I think there's no wrong answer to growth. This is all by design. I've spoken to very successful and even very successful agencies who are generalists. Right. And again, success can be relative, but they're pretty freaking good. And the key thing here is, like you mentioned, there are core competencies that they have, but they are always inside. They're leaning into, I need to niche down. I need to focus on one thing. And so there is that tug and pull. And then when you're super niche, you're like, oh, I'm saying no to some other opportunities. So there is that tug and pull. And I don't think the grass is greener on any side. I think it doesn't align with your team, the culture, your goals, the future of the business, as well as your personality. I think that's something that people really don't talk about.
Yeah. I think if you look at customer success, and I've done this and gone through and looked at customer success of niched firms versus non-niche firms who are running like NPS surveys is the way that I looked at it. The niche firms have a higher NPS than the generalist firms on average. They also, the more, and that core, like that's not just a one and done, but the more highly niched, the higher the predictability of the outcome.
Yeah.
Versus if you actually force people to not, typically you say send out NPS and be like, okay, we'll send it to this firm and not that firm because they had a bad experience. We already know what they're going to say. Well, that's not
a true, no.
That's not NPS.
Manipulate the data.
But if you actually had to send it to everybody, you're going to see more predictability in client outcomes the more niched you are. But on the flip side, growth is often, and this cuts both ways. Sometimes growth is way higher. If you've done a good job positioning your niche, I think you can grow faster. But we do see a lot of larger firms who are full service, and that's sometimes adding on services to serve existing customers. But where does that motivation to say, I want to niche down usually come from? It's chaotic in here. We've invited in so many different variables. We're trying to staff for so many different types of work that there's a lot of chaos that goes along with that. But at the same time, there's a lot of revenue that goes along with that. So I don't think that there's like you said, there's just competing values. And what do you value more or want to build? That's a lot to do with that.
Yeah. There's so many different ways to have a conversation with that. I think Blair Enns or David Baker have had around horizontal or vertical positioning, et cetera. But I think here, I don't want to just talk about that the leverage expertise is only simply niching, because I really appreciate the perspective that it's not just a niche. It's not I solve this one problem or this one thing, but it's a dependable source of knowledge, because that's part of the culture too. If you're saying this is a central source of truth of what we're doing for this particular problem that we're solving, we may not have all the answers, but we'll be pretty darn good if we just focus our intention and effort towards it. The interesting thing that I want to just talk as a peer here, like some of my clients in the portfolio are switching or transitioning towards like subscription based.
Yeah.
And which is a popular trend. It's an amazing business model. Lots of things. You can't just do it overnight and just expect things to work. Well, there is a transition mode. But when you do that, it forces you naturally to focus what is the core thing you solve for, and what are some of the things that you identify. Help me maybe just to brainstorm here. Where does leveraged expertise play a role in not just business model pricing, because you can do value-based price per unit economics or price per solution or productized service, but how does it look like here? Because when you talk about leveraged expertise, specifically for what you do, typically it feels like it's a project-based approach.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I have this problem. Hey, can you do surgery on my arm? Once you do that surgery, it's over, then I heal. How does that play a role with LTV? How does that play a role with renewals? How does that play a role with solving additional problems that happen once you've healed my arm?
Yeah. I'd say the first pro in the subscription model is it creates the right incentives for, or that's not 100% true. It could also create totally the wrong incentives as well to move away from it. But it does create an incentive to say, what does it look like to maintain and optimize this? So like, how do you get better and make better decisions over time? So somebody comes and says, nothing's working project. We don't have a defined project management methodology. We hate all the tools that we've ever tried, whatever else. And we come in with a strong point of view and say, here's a methodology about how you ought to be operating. We'll help you set that up inside this tool and we'll train your team. And in the project base, like that's for the first couple of years of this iteration of Zenpilot, or basically Zenpilot, because we did the rebrand at the same time. That was where a lot of stuff like primarily stopped. There'd be some support afterwards. And the problem that a lot of those teams didn't solve then was, hey, we've given you the infrastructure to access a lot of this data, but we haven't trained you on any of the skill set of looking at the data, analyzing the data, making better decisions about how you scale your team, how you price and package. And so it does create the right incentive to figure out how do we drive more and more value over time. You should keep paying us in a subscription model as long as we're driving a lot more value each month or each quarter or each year or whatever than what you're paying. And then the flip side, I think the natural side of most subscription models is it turns into what's the easiest to go service. And it's just these repeatable things every month over and over. And yeah, that's your
That's so typical. They're just selling simple stamps, and then it becomes almost commodity pricing. It's like, okay,
exactly.
that's great.
Right.
I got 5 options. Who do I like the most?
Yep. Yeah. Which I've wrestled with. Hey, I think there's an area. Is there an area of Zenpilot that's not a leveraged expertise model? And it's where it's less, like it's lower, maybe premium on that. And it's more of a volume play of, hey, we've helped all these folks. Now there's a very tangible need. Like one of the things I've looked at buying several recruiting or staffing firms because almost everyone that we work with there's some team changes that need to make, and there's this new skill set that they need to bring in. And that move would be much more of a tactical, okay, this is a hands-on, you're paying specifically for this service. It's not that knowledge or expertise doesn't matter there, but it's much more of a, hey, let me just do this thing for you.
They need it done.
Yeah. And to date, I haven't made that move, but I do think there's a potential fit there at some point in time. And that looks like a deviation or a move away with a component of the business that's much more. David Baker, who you referenced earlier, talks about like thinking and doing in 2 different rooms, and that'd be much more like the doing, the execution room than the strategic room.
Yeah, but that seems like it's more like an a la carte. Okay, solve this thing because you want to upgrade just for this season, or it's like a little dopamine rush. We'll continue with the strategy. One of the things too, where like just in real time working with clients, just seeing this in my own business, you embed, and I'm a strong advocate for this, to embed strategy before execution. Right. I think the subscription model just begs the thing, hey, I'm going to do these things for you. These are the things you can expect. And they anchor towards an outcome, not anchors towards a possibility or a value add or like intangibles. Where do you draw the line, or how do you focus on the continual focus on strategy with some of the execution? Because the execution is, and this might be a blanket statement, but sometimes it is the easiest thing to sell. Once you do the strategy, it's like, hey, here's your roadmap for the next 6 to 12 months. Here's what we're going to work with you to help execute that so that your team can be trained up. This is just my model. I work with them. I build the infrastructure in-house with them. They have their own asset. They don't depend on an external force for the asset. They have it all in-house. They can go execute on it, and they are stronger even if I'm not there, which I think is a goal. But they always want that relationship. It's just my personal lifetime value. How do you separate that in terms of the client expectations and also not be super tempted to just go, hey, we'll just do it for you, because it's literally served on a platter for you to go like, hey, we should just do it for you.
Yeah. I think there's a component in what we do for most of our clients that is, hey, we're hands-on. We're also executing. We're not purely strategy. Yeah. To the incentive piece, I think that looks like, hey, we're going to do purely strategic work at the very beginning. So this is like our blueprint service that everybody starts with at the very beginning. That's the first thing that we're going to wind up doing together. Then we go into a really tactical, executionary and training mode, as it's, hey, here's the hands-on implementation together. We're training you. Part of the strategy there is teaching people the why of the what. It'd be way easier. And I think clients would probably pay more. I don't know if they'd pay more. We can get there a lot faster if we just did a lot more stuff for teams. But to your point, it doesn't build any of the muscles or the understanding of, hey, what are we actually building here for them to be able to maintain over time, which is an important part of what we're trying to do. But I think where we go back, hey, we've built this infrastructure, we've launched it. Now you're getting better data to run your firm more profitably. Like the only way that you get more profitable, more healthy, and more productive is if you actually start applying what you're learning from that data. Like without that habitual practice of going back to the data that you work so hard to get and having that inform the decisions that you make, then you're very little better off than you were before. That's the next phase of strategy that comes. Is the first one was strategy of how you ought to mechanize and optimize your operations better from a like what gets you better data. The second iteration of our strategy wheel is now looking at this data, how do we interpret it? And then how does that apply specifically to your situation? And I think that's our example or model, but I think in most firms, you've got these different cycles of maturation on the client side. And then each of those cycles has some element of strategic skills needed and then new implementation work needed too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's almost like it's based on their current needs. They all go through similar life cycle. Like they have a pain point. Typically the solutions and the implementations are similar, albeit different verticals, different person, different location, etc. But then you also have that strategic lens to say, here's what's next, or here's what's possible when you do what's next. I think 2 other questions here, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on. So monthly versus anchoring on saying, hey, this is going to take, you have to commit for at least 3 months versus just month to month, or commit to 6 months versus just month to month. One of my buddies runs a design firm. I think they're like 9 to 15K. And they said, yeah, sometimes clients drop off after 2 or 3 months, and that sucks, but others stay for the entire year or whatever. So how do you navigate that possible fluctuation when you're working on the subscription model?
I don't know if this is right at all, but my gut is how much friction is there to get results? So for sure, it's way easier to sell something that's month to month than to sell an annual subscription or whatever else. If you have the type of service that I can plug into and I'm getting great results, it's not a huge amount of work for me and I'm getting awesome results in month 1. The natural stickiness of that is higher. And so I'm more inclined to say, yeah, sell it on a monthly basis. Flip side
the risk is low for you. Because is this a risk analysis or is this I think it's a risk analysis, but
yeah, it's for sure. It's really like in the client's best interest is they have some outcome that they're trying to achieve. I would like as many people who want to achieve that and who fit my criteria for who I want as a client to experience this. So that's the front end. That's like, how many people can I close? So it's easier to close. I'll close more people if it's a monthly offer. But then how many of those people will drop out? So if it's relatively low risk, they're not like relatively few will drop out before hitting that outcome. You want to maximize the funnel and open that up and sell it monthly probably. The flip side is if you got the type of service, and this is like leadership development is a really challenging one to work through. Anything that involves people and change management, there's a lot of pain that goes along with that. Mm-hmm. And so that's really hard but there will be plenty of times that somebody wants to quit in that process. And so those are the areas where I know it's going to get hard here at 6 weeks. I'm doing you a huge disservice if I sell you a monthly opportunity to be able to back out. I'd rather say, hey, you need to sign up for 6 months or 3 months or whatever the minimum time frame is. So I think this is just an optimization problem. And nobody really knows, but take your best guess at first and then measure it and adjust. How do we get as many of those right fit folks in, but not get folks in and set them up for failure where we know it's going to be hard and they're going to want to quit, and don't give them that out if you don't need to. Yeah.
Coming from the marketing world, like everyone would say leads suck or whatever. So it's similar here. Like you could do a close one deal, but the quality of that close one deal, are they mentally prepared to stick around? But it's also, that's the risk analysis, but it's also the results analysis.
Yeah.
Like for me, transparently for me on the back end for some of the leadership stuff, like the bigger pieces that we play with, it's a 6-month minimum. There's no way I'm going to get you a result in 2 months or 3 months. Right. Like you'll see traction, you'll see growth, but the results usually take after month 4 or 5. But it's also maturity piece too. Like people who aren't ready for that, like people who know, who like you mentioned, have the reps in the back. I have already done this a couple times. They know how long things take to actually bear fruit.
Right.
I think the final question, this is I'm pretty curious, is you've gamified. We're playing with the subscription and like price per economics, even though it's still anchored towards the subscription, like the monthly points. Tell me where the idea for points came from. How does that actually work to get results? And it also makes it fun. It's almost like a little mini dopamine. Like I'm eating like that ice cream with little balls, like just one bit at a time.
Yeah. This is a big experiment. It's about a year old for us right now. So moving to subscriptions, and what you're buying is you're buying a capacity of points. So you spend $6,000 a month, you're buying 60 points. a month. And so what the heck do points mean is the obvious question then. So everything that we do, we defined our core set of deliverables, and there's a little less than 60 different deliverables that we could do. Each one of those 60 deliverables has a set number of impact points tied to it. And so the idea behind that is, how do we try to base it around the value of what comes out of that? For some things, so like the most common points implementation when I see a team run on points is it's purely there to obscure hours.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you. Is this anchor tied to hours? Is this your pricing thing? Or
right. Way simpler in those cases to just say it's hours. Like then we don't have to play any of the games tied to it. So we have a mix. We've got a bunch of stuff templatized, ready to go. You can go through 12 hours worth of really in-depth training that's all pre-recorded. There's no additional hourly cost to us to go share that, but there is value that's derived by clients from going through that. And that's an example, but templates or even software, where we're very much a tech-enabled firm as well. We're balancing, like, how do we mix? Hours don't really make sense to sell because the results that we can get somebody 2 days into something in terms of what their workspace looks like, it would take somebody else who doesn't have this built out 3 months to go build. So there's a lot of value there. So part of it was mixing that. And then part of it was saying, how do we, through the client's eyes, and so this was a bunch of client conversations as well, what do they perceive as most valuable? And we're going to try to build this as on average, it's going to be, I realize people would look at it differently. And in one person's case, they'd rather pay a lot more than less. But how do we put a value quantity of points on each of these things that we can do? And then the other piece is we're really trying to create standardization as the team scales, and we have different folks doing the strategic work and making recommendations to be able to build a plan consistently that says, hey, this is what they need, and this is therefore how many points. There's no back and forth. If you buy something from me and you buy it from somebody else on the team, you're not going to get different point values than for each deliverable than what we would have had before. So it's all standardized. So part of it was standardized, which, flies in the face of some of the value-based pricing. Like, we are not pricing the customer anymore. And so this is a challenging one with our model, which is relatively high volume and relatively low spend. If you looked at us versus a marketing firm, an average client's going to spend about $60,000 over the course of a year with us. And that's way lower than, here's a $30,000 a month marketing retainer that a lot of our clients have. Mm-hmm. So I think if that was flipped, I would go a different way and I'd say, hey, price the job or price the client, not the specific work. But for our model, that was part of the push behind it. So I don't know if I answered. There's probably more details to get into there, but that's some of the thinking behind it.
I think that's a much better framing of the question that I ask. Because essentially you're right, like each point is worth like quote unquote $100, but it's less of that, but you're pricing to the value versus pricing to the value of the outcome to the specific client. And I've recently made a post, like I made a confession, like not everyone should value price. Right. Like I love value pricing. I absolutely love it, but not everyone should do it. Right. And there's also a huge trend right now with SaaS too, because it's almost, this is the most similar pricing model that I've seen to one of my popular tools. I won't just name the names here, no relationship with them. Well, I have a slight relationship with them. But for them, I could easily accidentally just spend $1,000 just in one sitting. Because you're using what you're using. It's amazing. So I really like that. And you customize it, standardize it, base it on value, but then also your profitability is baked in, almost guaranteed to whatever you're doing because you've already worked backwards from that. And you can still create custom, quote unquote, bespoke offerings to the client based on what they actually need. So they feel like they're getting the value and they're happy to pay it. And it's almost like an addiction to work with you. Yeah.
Do you think some of the things that we're still trying to figure out there are, what do we do with some past clients who have much smaller needs? Hey, I don't need 40 points a month, or I don't need that every month. So how do we deal with that? That's one challenge. And then the challenge with any of these models, this is any pricing model, but how small is too small? We've just having this conversation with a relatively early stage agency. They're a couple years in, they're 8 people, and they don't fit in terms of their budget and what they want help with. No, we don't totally agree on what they want help with versus what they need help with, but they would love to pay $3,000 a month and be on a plan smaller than our lowest plan right now. And that conversation is not uncommon at all. But somewhere you have to draw a line and say, hey, here's where it makes sense for us to actually have a client on a subscription model, and here's where it doesn't. Those are cases where it's like, hey, this does not make sense for us to bring that on right now. But solving some of those, there's still challenges. This doesn't solve all the pricing or packaging questions or issues that you'd ever have. But I think it has been helpful to create clarity for the internal team, create clarity for clients. It's still not as clear as I would like it to be for folks to understand it for the first time. The subscription model makes total sense. The what the heck are points and how do they work piece does not make total sense the first time that you look at it. Clients who've been working with it.
If they haven't used SaaS tools that aren't based on unit economics, it makes zero sense. But once you live that life and you that, okay, this makes total sense as long as they see what they're doing. The only issue there is that you don't want to position it as a Chinese menu of services.
Huge.
And then, I've fired agencies who they charge me $500 per email. I don't see the value in that little simple email that you wrote with ChatGPT. What am I getting here?
I think it's definitely true. We've not open sourced what is that deliverable menu?
Yeah.
That's not, you can't go on the website and see that, because ultimately it's still our job as the expert to say, here's what you actually need. And then
you're making the roadmap.
Here's the point.
Have you considered doing an a la carte purchase? If you do the subscription, the points are $100 per point, but you have to buy at least 25 points to work with us. Right. But they're going to come at $250 if you just want to buy a la carte.
Yeah. So I haven't shared this publicly before, but anyone who's been a past client or existing client, they have the ability to purchase point bundles if they need something. So it's exactly that. If you want to buy 10 points, it's this upgraded price. If you want to buy 50, it's either 10, 50, or 100, and you buy a bucket. And the two things that are true about that are, like you're saying, you pay more when you buy a la carte bundles. And then the second thing is you don't get first dibs on our capacity. Mm-hmm. So if some of those points are going towards not a product, but, okay, I need a coaching session for this, or I need a training session on how we're going to run this and in this, that's fine. And hopefully we can accommodate that. But our subscribers, the folks who are on, they've got the first dibs on our team's capacity. So you're kind of getting the seconds. I haven't found a way to make that sound more appealing than what I just explained.
Yeah,
I don't want that to sound like, hey, we don't care about you at all. It's just hey, there is an extra bonus if you are a subscriber and you're an active client who's on a subscription. You're not going to get bumped because we had some people ask for point bundles, and so we jumped to take care of them first.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's with clear expectations. One of the things I do is with subscription that I have to my stuff, it's for the lower tier, it'll be top tier gets response 1 business day to 2 max. Yep. Lower tier, it might take 2 to 3 days or longer, depending on the complexity of the question. Not because I'm not going to get to it. It's just because there's this level of urgency of what takes precedence. So I don't think it's a negative approach. I think people know. But that's pretty cool. And it's almost like you got them, use them when you need them, but here you got them. And that way they still almost subscribe to you on a infrequent basis. Great. This was fascinating, getting to know and understand pretty much your thinking behind the thinking and understanding what you're doing and being vulnerable to say this is still a test. I think that's the most valuable piece that people look at other companies, maybe if they're looking at competitors, just because they are doing something doesn't mean they have it all figured out. And I really appreciate you bringing that to light. I know it's working, but I think that's pretty freaking awesome. For our listeners out there, where's the best place for people to, 1, thank you for being on, and 2, learn more about you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the easiest. So just Gray MacKenzie on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Gray, thanks again. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get more of these podcasts, please go ahead and subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to the pod. If you have any suggestions or questions that you want me to answer on the pod, or you have a guest that you want me to interview,
please go ahead and email me all of your suggestions and questions at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. If you'd like to give me public feedback, you can go on Apple Podcasts, and from there you can leave up to a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like more free resources where you can get my best strategies to help you increase your company's performance and scale profitably, you can get handpicked articles to propel your growth, and you can get trainings and discussions that I give freely online, as well as low-cost resources such as my books and guides. You can get all of that by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. 90% of all of these resources are not behind any email opt-ins. You can get instant access by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. Now, if you'd like to accelerate your progress and shorten the gap between information and action and start seeing results in your business, let's work together to increase your company's performance and scale profitably and serve more clients without the overwhelm. You can request a free clarity call to see how we can best support you to reach your goals by going to dogoodwork.io/apply. Again, that's dogoodwork.io/apply. As always, it's an honor to be a small part in your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.